Long before the rise of cities, before the first temple was built or the first word was written, there existed a time when the world was a frozen battlefield of survival. The earth was locked in the grip of the Ice Age. Vast plains of snow and silence stretched endlessly, where wind howled like a ghost across the tundra and shadows of enormous beasts moved against the pale horizon. In that world, our ancestors, fragile, barefoot, and armed with nothing but sharpened sticks and courage, faced creatures so mighty they could crush them in a heartbeat. Among these titans was one beast that towered above all others, the woolly mammoth. It was a creature of mythic scale, weighing over 6 tons, wrapped in a thick coat of fur, its long curved tusks gleaming like ivory scythes. To face it was to stare at death itself. Yet the early humans dared to challenge it. This was the first great hunt, the moment when humankind's courage, intelligence, and unity were tested as never before. The age of giants 40,000 years ago, Earth was home to giants. Herds of mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses marched across frozen plains. Massive cave lions and saber-toothed cats ruled the forests. To survive in this brutal landscape, humans had to do more than adapt. They had to evolve. Unlike their animal rivals, humans had no claws to tear, no fangs to kill, no thick hides to protect them from the cold. What they had was far greater, a mind that could imagine, plan, and remember. It was this weapon, hidden inside a fragile body, that would one day rule the world. But in those early days, survival was uncertain. Every meal was a victory, and every mistake could end a life. Hunger, cold, and predators hunted man as much as man hunted them. Still, deep within the human spirit burned a fire that refused to be extinguished. They learned to communicate with signs, gestures, and primitive sounds. They shared warmth around the fire, stories in the flickering shadows, and slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. They started to think not as individuals, but as a tribe. They learned that together, they were unstoppable. The mammoth, a mountain of life. The mammoth wasn't just a creature. It was a moving fortress. To early humans, it represented both death and salvation. Its meat could feed a tribe for months. Its hide could be turned into shelter and clothing. Its bones could be carved into weapons, tools, and even art. To hunt one was to secure life itself. But bringing down a mammoth was no easy task. One wrong move could end in disaster. A single charge from the beast could scatter a group, crush bones, and destroy everything. Yet, the reward was worth the risk, and so the humans began to plan. This was the dawn of human strategy, the beginning of intellect as a survival tool. Hunters studied the herds from afar, learning their patterns, migration paths, and behavior. They realized that brute force alone could never win. What they needed was coordination, timing, and unity. And thus, the idea of the organized hunt, the first great hunt, was born. The first great hunt begins. The morning of the hunt began before sunrise. The air was sharp, every breath turning to mist. The hunters stood in silence, their faces marked with ash and clay, symbols of courage and unity. They carried spears tipped with stone, their shafts hardened in fire. They were ready to risk everything. The plan was simple yet brilliant. The tribe would use fire, noise, and movement to drive the mammoths toward a trap, a narrow valley, a steep cliff, or a pit carved into the earth. Once the beasts were cornered, the hunters would strike. At the signal, the plains came alive. The humans screamed, waved torches, and threw stones. The herd roared and began to move, confused and terrified. Dust and snow filled the air. The ground shook beneath their pounding feet. The hunters ran alongside, directing the chaos like conductors of an ancient orchestra. Every movement was planned, every step calculated. And when the moment came, when the great beast stumbled and fell, the tribe surrounded it. Spears flew through the air, striking its thick hide. The battle lasted hours, and then, finally, with one last bellow that echoed through the frozen plains, the mammoth collapsed. Triumph and transformation, the world stood still. The hunters gathered around the fallen beast, not as individuals, but as one people bound by courage, intelligence, and shared purpose. Their exhaustion turned to relief, their fear to joy. For the first time in history, humans had brought down something far greater than themselves. This was more than just a victory for survival. It was a moment that changed humanity forever. In conquering the mammoth, they discovered what it meant to work together, to think ahead, to believe in something larger than fear. That day, the humans didn't just kill a giant, they became one. The feast of life. As night fell, the tribe celebrated under the stars. The mammoth's flesh roasted over the fire, its fat fueling the flames. The smell of cooked meat filled the air, and the hunters sang, their voices rising like prayers to the night sky. Every part of the creature was used. Its bones became tools and weapons. Its hide became tents and clothing. Even its tusks were carved into ornaments and idols, symbols of power, memory, and respect. Around the fire, elders told the story of the hunt to the young. They described the courage of those who faced the beast, the unity of those who fought together, and the wisdom that had led them to victory. And through those stories, a new kind of inheritance was born. Knowledge became humanity's greatest weapon. It was passed down, remembered, and refined. The next generation would hunt better, faster, and smarter. The tribe had learned that intelligence could overcome strength, and that strategy could conquer fear. The evolution of the hunter over time, these hunts shaped the very fabric of what it meant to be human. Tools became sharper, spears evolved into throwing weapons, the bow was born. Humans learned to use traps, teamwork, and timing to control their world. But the greatest evolution wasn't physical, it was mental. Through hunting, humans learned cooperation. They developed language to coordinate attacks, symbols to record ideas, and rituals to remember their dead. They began to think in terms of we, not I, and that single idea, unity, became the foundation of civilization. The campfire where hunters once planned their hunts became the heart of human culture. It was around the fire that art, storytelling, and belief began to grow. The legacy of the first great hunt thousands of years later, the mammoths are gone. Their bones lie buried beneath ice and earth, silent witnesses to a vanished age. Yet their spirit lives on in us. Every skyscraper that pierces the clouds, every spacecraft that leaves the Earth, every invention and discovery, all of it traces back to that first moment when humans looked at something bigger, stronger, and deadlier, and refused to back down. The first great hunt wasn't just about food, it was about transformation. It was the moment when the fragile became fearless, when instinct turned into intellect, and when survival gave birth to civilization. In hunting the mammoth, humans didn't just master nature, they mastered themselves. We are the descendants of those hunters. The courage that burned in their hearts still burns in ours. Every challenge we face today, every problem we solve, every fear we overcome, is a reflection of that ancient spirit. When our ancestors stood before the giant and chose to fight, they carved the first chapter of the human story, a story of struggle, intelligence, and victory against all odds. And though the beasts have vanished, the lesson remains eternal. Humanity's greatest weapon has never been strength. It has always been the will to survive, the power to think, and the courage to unite.